Sure. Thank you, Danny, for hosting this and putting this together. Thank you all for coming. I hope the rest of the 158 people do show up. Can I just quickly, how many people here, or is anybody here from Palestine, or as some people call it, Israel? Anybody from there? One person. Anybody here visited the country? A few. Okay. Good. Is there anybody here who could not find it on a map if they had to? Everybody thinks they can find it on a map. It's a very small place. Okay. So I want to make it clear. I'm going to start. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. The introduction did a little bit of that. This is not a dialogue. There's not going to be a dialogue here. You're going to be presented with two very different and entirely different points of view. At the end of which, hopefully, you'll be able to come down on one side or the other. There's no room for dialogue, and I'll explain why in a little bit on this issue. My own story is, as you heard, I grew up in a very patriotic Israeli household. I had in my family a president of the State of Israel, a signer of the Declaration of Independence of the State of Israel, and a father who was a general. And so that was my upbringing. A sense of patriotism, a sense of the importance of Zionism, and the values of Zionism were very clear to me. And then at a certain point in my life, there was a break, and big changes usually happen when there's a tragic break. Please, Dr. Karmi, please. If you don't know Dr. Karmi, thank you for coming. In my case, it was the death of my 13-year-old niece in a suicide attack in Jerusalem. And that forced me into a journey into Palestine. And that's the title of my book, The General Son Journey of an Israeli into Palestine, and forced me to understand or to see what is Israel, what is Palestine, and define these things. And the end of the story is that, not the end of the story, but where the story sits right now, I should say, is that my realization was that the entire country is Palestine, from the river to the sea. It has been occupied, it has been subjected to ethnic cleansing, it has been subjected to genocide, and it has been subjected to a vicious apartheid regime, and my whole family has had a role in that, including myself. I served in the IDF, something I regret, and I have no excuse and no way to justify. So that is my background. That is where I stand today, and today I speak about the vision of a single democracy with equal rights for all who live between the river and the sea, who all live in historic Palestine. But there is a problem that exists here. And the problem is not what some people like to call a conflict. Rather, the problem is that Zionism, even though it is a racist ideology, even though it practices and preaches ideology, even though it uses extreme means of violence against innocent civilians, is still tolerated. And so, with the safe space little blurb that we heard earlier, I doubt that if that's representatives of the KKK, for example, or any other racist, supremacist organization were here, they'd be welcomed and tolerated. But Zionism still maintains, there's still tolerance here in the UK and in the West for Zionism, and that is precisely, I believe, the problem. Now, and again, the case of Ambassador Regev coming here and the protests that took place, I think, are a case in point. That is precisely the way somebody who represents a racist state should be welcomed or should be received. So I think that is the problem. Now, why you should care here in the UK, I think, has become very, very clear over the last few years with the vicious attacks by Zionists against Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy Corbyn is probably one of the most promising leaders the UK has had in decades, and promises to be one of the best prime ministers the United Kingdom has had in decades. Yet, he's being viciously attacked. Incredible lies are being told about him, about being anti-Semitic and denying the Holocaust and supporting terrorism and all kinds of nonsense. And this is only because he stands firm for justice, for freedom, for equality, everywhere, including Palestine. And the Zionists here in this country are terrified, and the Zionists in Tel Aviv are terrified, all the way to Benjamin Netanyahu, who's been spreading lies about Jeremy Corbyn as well, because they know that a Jeremy Corbyn will stop selling weapons to Israel. A Jeremy Corbyn will demand that Israel is held accountable for its crimes against the Palestinians. So you should care, because this is an intervention in British democracy. This is a severe, not quite violent, but a severe and perhaps even unprecedented interference in the democracy here in the UK. Thankfully, most Brits do not care about this nonsense, do not pay attention to these lies, and they don't stick, and Corbyn is doing quite well in polls. And hopefully he will be Prime Minister very, very soon. I don't believe I said anything funny. I think leaving here today, the vision is that, or the vision that you should carry with you as you leave tonight, is that there are two opposing, unbridgeable ideas here. One that is based on racism, intolerance, and violence, which is basically what the Zionists and all the Friends of Israel groups are promoting. And one is a vision that wants to bring about justice, freedom, and equality, which, by the way, are the three aims, the three demands of the BDS call, the call for boycott, divestment, and sanctions. And the question boils down to not really politics or religion, but it boils down to your own values. What are your values? Do your values tolerate racism and violence, or do your own values believe in justice and equality and in freedom for all people? And then what kind of legacy do you want to leave for your children and grandchildren? Because all of us are going to be judged on this issue. Just like people were judged on where they stood on apartheid. Just like people were judged on where they stood on civil rights and other important issues. People are going to be judged on this. And when the question comes up, where did you stand on the issue of Palestine? Nobody's going to be, in the end of this, going to say or want to say or be proud to say, oh yes, of course, I stood with the racism. I stood with Israel. I stood with the violence against the Palestinians. And so the people that do are either going to lie or hide in shame. But where are you going to stand? And what do you want to tell your grandchildren? Would you rather say, I stood with Mandela? Or would you rather be like the people who are today hiding in shame because they stood against Mandela? And this is really your choice. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that, Raphi.
Good evening. Thank you also for having me here tonight. I would like to start by saying I am a proud Zionist, and I also did serve in the IDF, and I am very proud of that fact. Zionism is simply the right of the Jewish people to have self-determination in their ancestral homeland. Jews have had an unbroken connection to the land of Israel for millennia. And Zionism is much more than just what often is discussed in terms of its modern political form. It's much, much more than that. And let me tell you why. If you look at Jewish prayer books and customs going back centuries and even millennia, you will see constant mentions of returning to Israel and Jerusalem. At a Jewish wedding ceremony, a glass is smashed in memory of Jerusalem and of the temple. At the Passover Seder, Jews around the world say next year in Jerusalem. Jewish prayer books have constant mentions of Israel and Zion. At the grace after meals that people say, there's mentions of Jerusalem. Everywhere you go within the Jewish religion, there are constant references to Israel and Jerusalem. So it's much more than a modern political movement, and I think it's important to understand that. We have an unbroken connection to that land going back millennia. Jews who live outside of Israel say that they live in the galut in Hebrew, that means in exile. And synagogues, certainly in the Western world, the ark in a synagogue all faces towards Jerusalem. This isn't some sort of just a modern political movement. This is something that is ingrained in our DNA, to most of us in any event. And in this country, 90% of Jews in the UK are Zionists. Other people might tell you otherwise. I work within the Jewish community. The vast majority of synagogues, of Jewish schools, of communal organizations, and newspapers are Zionist. This is not something that's a minor form of movement. Jews are a nation and a religion. We're a people and a religion. And Israel is the nation state of the Jewish people. There are, in this world, 12 countries that call themselves Christian, many more where there are Christian majority. There are 53 plus Muslim countries. There's only one Jewish country, just one. But Israel is also the only democracy in the Middle East. In a sea of dictatorship, in a sea of tyranny, Israel is the only democracy. It has one vote for one person. It has freedom of religion, freedom of sexuality. Compare that to the countries around it. Compare that to life under the Palestinian Authority or under Hamas in Gaza. It doesn't happen there. Like any democracy, including our own, it's not perfect. No country is. It's a young country. It's 70 years old. But it's a democracy nonetheless, and it's a bright one. Countless surveys have shown that Israeli Arabs prefer to live as Israeli citizens. And indeed, I was in Israel in April and I spent a day with a tour guide from East Jerusalem. We went into the West Bank, and she said quite categorically that overwhelmingly the majority of citizens of East Jerusalem want to live under Israeli sovereignty. It's the only country in the world, and this is important as well, that faces constant calls for its destruction. Iran, non-state actors like Hamas and Hezbollah. It's the only, let me repeat that, it's the only country in the world that faces daily calls for it to be destroyed. Now, I believe in two states living side by side in peace and security, a bit like Miko Peled's father did. Israel has always given up land for peace. It's always relinquished sovereignty for peace. In 1947, despite, by the way, the San Remo Agreement giving the Jews all of what we now know as between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea, Israel agreed to the 1947 partition plan. It's always given up land for peace. It withdrew from Gaza in 2005, it withdrew from Sinai when it made peace with Egypt. Each time, those peace offers were rejected by the wider Arab world. Since Oslo, we've got to remember that approximately 4.2 million Palestinians live under Palestinian rule. They don't live under Israeli rule, they live under Palestinian rule in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. But to make peace, and this is at the crux of the matter, to make peace, Israel needs a partner. In 2000 and 2008, Ehud Barak and Ehud Olmert made fantastic offers for peace. Anybody here who's studying law knows that in life you have to negotiate. And 97% of what was offered was rejected, including land swaps, and this isn't just me saying this has been confirmed by President Clinton and other people who were involved in it. In 2005, it withdrew from Gaza. Gaza could have been the Singapore of the Middle East. It had a flourishing agricultural industry that the World Bank went out and raised $300 million to buy and give to the Palestinians to run this flourishing economy. They're now rocket launching sites. They were destroyed. And they were destroyed because Israel now has Hamas, who seeks to destroy it. If you look at the Hamas charter, the first line says quite clearly that it seeks to destroy Israel. Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, said in 2002 that he's happy that there's a state of Israel because it means he doesn't have to hunt down Jews all over the world, they'll all be in one place. This is the type of thing that you have to understand Israel is facing. We've seen over the past few days tragic incidences of terrorism in Judea and Samaria in the West Bank. A baby, an unborn baby, had to be delivered prematurely after being shot in the stomach by a Palestinian terrorist. The baby sadly died, was buried. The terrorist was found and killed, but the Palestinian Authority runs a pay-to-slay operation. $320 million a year goes to pay salaries to terrorists who are either in jail or the families of terrorists who've been killed. But look at the Palestinians themselves. They can't live with each other. The Palestinian Authority and Hamas are at odds with each other. So I ask you, who does Israel have to make peace with? The answer is that there's no one. Does anybody expect Israel to withdraw from the West Bank and have a Gaza version 2 with a failed state on its doorstep and rocket attacks? I don't think any state would put its citizens in that position. So there's no one to make peace with, and because of that, we have BDS, boycott, divestment and sanctions. But let's be clear, Miko Peled has just said this, boycott, divestment and sanctions is not about two states, it's not about peace, it's about the destruction of Israel.
I said that?
Well, you said
I said that?
You said you don't believe
Don't put
it.
words in my mouth. I did not say it was about the destruction of Israel. You watch what you say. I did not say it's about the destruction. I said it was about freedom, justice, and
Okay.
equality.
So
That is what I said.
Finishes remarks.
It's a little bit aggressive.
So the BDS movement, I'll address that before I finish, if I may. The end of the to me, the BDS movement is about the end of the Jewish state, and therefore it is anti-Semitic. They attack Israel with lies of genocide. Israel is committing genocide against Palestinians. And let's look at the facts. Let's be clear. In 1948, there were approximately 640,000 Arabs or Palestinians. There are now 4.2 million living between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. That's not genocide by anybody's calculation. Genocide is the systematic eradication of a race and a religion, and that is not genocide. And it confirms its anti-Semitic nature by focusing solely on Israel, on the Jewish state. Countless other conflicts in the world, it focuses solely on the Jewish state. And it's very interesting because when you hear about Israelis talk about the conflict, they talk about peace, shalom, peace. When you talk about the Arabs and the pro-Palestinians talk about the conflict, they talk about justice. Why is that? Because to the Arab world, it is an injustice that there is a Jewish state in the Arab Middle East on a piece of land the size of Wales. And so until the Arab world can make itself reconcile itself to the fact that there will be a Jewish state there will not be peace. But then if we look at BDS a bit more closely, actually, in economic terms, it's failing. I mean, I noticed, Miko, if I can just say, I don't know if you want to hold it up, but I think you're using an iPhone there. Apple's second largest R&D center outside of Israel, outside of the United States, is in Israel. Okay? Miko Peled has got a BDS sign on, and he's using an iPhone. Now, if that doesn't make a hypocrisy of what he stands for, I don't know what does. You either stand for something or you don't. He is using an iPhone. Tourism is up, investment is up, trade between the UK and Britain is up. So they're failing. They're trying to delegitimize Israel, but they are failing. So Israel at 70 faces many challenges, but ultimately, its future is very bright, and it will remain as the only democracy in the Middle East. And when we talk about the destruction of Israel, let me just come to this one point that Miko Peled made, and it's very interesting. People who advocate for a one-state solution are either naive and foolish at best, or very dangerous and sinister, a bit like Miko Peled is at worst. And I'll explain why. People like Uri Avneri, the very famous left-wing Israeli journalist, who was, I believe, a friend of Miko Peled's father, said that a one-state solution is a crazy idea without foundation. Very soon, this one-state utopian idea that Miko Peled advocates would allow back in the 5.5 million Arabs that the Palestinians call refugees. In addition to that, does anybody really think, and does Miko Peled really think this, that after 70 years of their struggle, the Palestinians are going to give up their nationality, their flag, their symbols? So very soon, this state would vote to become an Arab Muslim state because of this huge majority that the Muslims in the state would have. Okay?
Very long 5 minutes.
Yeah, I'm going to finish in 2 minutes, sorry. I will finish. So, this would, very soon, the Jews would be a minority in this state, and like most minorities in the Middle East, would be tolerated at best. And furthermore, that doesn't even take into account Hamas, who would want this state to be an Islamic theocracy. And when you look at what Hamas did to Fatah in the Gaza Strip, this is a very, very, very real possibility. A recent survey by the Palestinian Center for Survey and Research showed that 36% of Gazans would seek to practice apartheid or expulsion on Jews living anywhere between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. And so people who advocate for a one-state solution, like Miko Peled, do it because they know that ultimately it would achieve what they want, which is a Jew-free area between the river and the sea. Thank you.
Give your response.
That was a very long 5 minutes. So do I get the same length of 5 minutes as he did?
Yeah.
Yes, you did.
You did 10
Well,
minutes.
we have one moderator here. Thank you. He's not sitting in the crowd. By the way, I see that the entire trumpet section of the Zionists in the UK is sitting right here. I see a recording. I hope you listen to this carefully over and over again. Hopefully we'll learn something from what is being said. There's so many lies and so much demagoguery coming from the other side that it's really hard to pinpoint anything to argue with. He talks about Jewish religion, the connection to the land of Israel. according to Jewish law, and Rabbi Beck was supposed to be here, and some of the other members of the notorious here, sadly they couldn't make it. You can laugh all you want. They make up close to 40,000 out of 260,000 of UK Jews. If you do the math-
There's 8 notorious kind of in Stamford Hill.
Let's not talk about it. Let's just listen to the issue at hand.
Okay.
Let's continue with the remarks. Go.
Are you going to keep them in here, or are you going to sit them out? Because I will not continue if they continue. According to strict Jewish law, Jews are forbidden from sovereignty in the Holy Land. According to Jewish law, Jews are forbidden from taking up arms. The Zionists, and according to Jewish law, to be a Jew, you need to be a Jew, a practicing Jew. To be secular and to be dedicated to the land of Israel is exactly the opposite of what it means to be Jewish. And Zionists are both secular and attached to the land. So how they can claim connection to Judaism? I mean, they talk about hypocrisy, and the way the ultra-Orthodox community is treated by the Zionists. You should take a look and see the riot police beating them up, the riot on horses, ramming into them, arresting them, torturing them in prisons because of their faith, because of their lack of willingness to serve in the Israeli army of terror, the IDF. So Zionists talking about Jewish connection to the land of Israel is really quite a joke. I mean, that's really the only thing I'll respond to. The ridiculous accusations and comments about BDS are absurd. The call for boycott, divestment, and sanctions came from Palestinian civil society, from a coalition of Palestinian organizations dealing with the issue of Palestine. The demands of the BDS, like I said earlier, are about justice, freedom, and equality, and it doesn't surprise me that Zionists do not like the word justice, because the existence of Zionism is all about an injustice and maintaining an injustice in Palestine, and as it relates to the Palestinians.
Right. We're going to move on to questions now. I'm just going to target one at you first, Raphi. So since Israel occupied East Jerusalem in 1967, 99.76% of state-owned land Israel has gone to Jewish settlers, who are just 12% of that area's population. And as a Human Rights Watch report says, Palestinians under Israeli control live in a time warp, not just separate, but unequal, but sometimes even pushed off their lands and out of their homes. So do you agree with an assessment made by either Sliman, the member of the Israeli parliament last year, who said that this is a policy of apartheid? What are your thoughts on that?
So there is no apartheid in East Jerusalem. Citizens, residents of East Jerusalem are able to vote in elections, and they have been ever since 1960. In fact, let's go take a step back. In 1967, when Israel captured or reconquered the old city in East Jerusalem, it offered citizenship to every single resident, every single Arab resident there, and collectively, politically, they decided to say no. In the most recent municipal elections, there was going to be an Arab candidate, a Palestinian candidate for the first time, and he received a huge amount of pressure from fellow residents of East Jerusalem not to run. So there's no apartheid in Jerusalem whatsoever. That's absolutely not the case. I acknowledge that there are efforts made to increase coexistence in the city, but absolutely not. There's no apartheid in Jerusalem whatsoever. And let's just remember about Jerusalem. Let's just touch on Jerusalem for a second. Jerusalem is the capital of the state of Israel. It's been the capital of the Jewish people, as I said, for millennia. It's the only place where Jews have had a capital ever. It's where the executive sits, it's where the judiciary sits, it's where the parliament sits, it's where the prime minister lives, it's where the president lives. It's where foreign heads of state go to meet their Israeli counterparts, and diplomats go to meet their Israeli counterparts. When Prince William visited Israel last year, he went to visit the president and the prime minister in Jerusalem, not in Tel Aviv. So it's the capital of Israel. There's no apartheid there. As I said, we spent a day with a tour guide from East Jerusalem in April, and she was very, very categoric about it. She said quite clearly, I want to remain living under Israeli sovereignty. A recent survey showed, by the way, that 82% of Israeli Arabs, this was done by the Palestinian Center for Survey and Research, showed that 82% of Israeli Arabs believe in a two-state solution. 82% of Israeli Arabs want to remain part of Israel, in two states living side by side. That's done by a Palestinian Centre for Survey and Research, not by an Israeli organisation. There's no apartheid. It's a lie. Okay? There's no apartheid in Jerusalem, there's no apartheid in Israel. My father, a number of years ago, unfortunately had a heart attack and a stroke in Tiberias. His life was saved by an Arab doctor. My son was in the Ziv hospital in Safat. He was treated by an Arab doctor. I work for an organisation here, a Jewish charity in the UK, in my day job, and we work with Israeli Arabs all across the Galilee. We're involved with an organisation called Merchavim, which is about getting Arab teachers into Israeli Jewish schools. There's huge amounts of work that goes on. This is not an apartheid country, and it's simply a lie to say so. The Supreme Court Justice who sent Moshe Katsav, the Israeli president, to jail was an Israeli Arab. That's not apartheid. Tell me how that can be apartheid. There are no separate buses, there are no separate hospitals. This is not apartheid. Okay. On the other hand, just let me finish one thing. On the other hand, a Jew is forbidden from buying land under the Palestinian Authority. And recently, a Palestinian who sold land to a Jew was killed and put to death for that. That is apartheid.
Just picking up on that, Miko. So, according to the Israel Central Bureau of Statistics, over 21% of Israel's population are Arab Israelis. The percentage of Arab Israelis pursuing higher education in Israel grew 78% between 2010 and 2017. They're able to vote in Israeli elections. 17 Arabs currently stand in the Israeli parliament. So how does this square with your accusation? 12. How does this square with your accusation that it's an apartheid state?
Well, the crime of apartheid is defined in international law. And it's quite easy, really, it's really quite easy to find out whether what Israel practices is apartheid or not. First of all, there are 55 or close to 55 laws that were passed in the Israeli Knesset that specifically discriminate against and there's no such thing as an Israeli Arab. These are Palestinians who remained in Palestine after the campaign of ethnic cleansing of 1948 and Israeli citizenship was forced upon them. So this is what they are. These are Palestinians who live within Palestine of 1948. The term Israeli apartheid is a derogatory, Israeli Arab is a derogatory term. And so let's put that in perspective. But denial of members of a racial group, the right to life or liberty, murdering members of a certain racial group, inflicting upon certain members of a racial group bodily harm or mental harm, legislating against a particular group, illegal imprisonment of members of a particular group, legislative measures, like I said, and on and on. So the definition of apartheid, according to international law, is well defined. You compare that to what the state of Israel has done from day one by declaring itself a Jewish state in an Arab country after destroying over 500 towns and villages, forcing close to 1 million Palestinians into out of the country and into mostly refugee camps. The very laws that describe citizenship, the very laws that describe the land ownership and who has the right to land ownership are apartheid laws. The state of Israel has been an apartheid state from day one. When you define yourself as a Jewish state in an Arab country, which is what Palestine really is, even though it's been subjected to settler colonialism, then it is an apartheid state. Now, it is true that the Palestinians of 1948 do have a right to vote. And the way Israel does that is really quite interesting. The entire country is one voting district. But Israel does not count the Palestinians who live in the borders after 1967. They only count the Palestinians in the pre-67 borders.
That's because it's the state of Israel.
As citizens, the Palestinians, the Jews who live in the settlements, in the colonies, in what used to be the West Bank and East Jerusalem, of course, are considered citizens, and they do get to vote and they are counted. The Palestinians do not get to vote and are not counted. So so the state of Israel has a very unique, a very interesting way of creating this, saying, well, they're 20% of the population. They're not 20% of the population. Out of 12 million people who live between the river and the sea, the majority today are Palestinians. There are close to 7 million Palestinians and about 6 million Israelis, and this according to Israeli military data that was published in the Israeli newspapers. So, out of all of those Palestinians, the only ones that are allowed to vote are the ones who live within 1948 and who have this quasi-citizenship. Now, their citizenship and my citizenship are not the same. We do not have the same rights. We do not get the same amounts of water. Our schools do not look alike. Our schools do not get the same budgets. Our cities do not get the same infrastructure. If I build a house without a permit, I may get a fine. If a Palestinian builds a house, and Palestinians never get permits, their house is going to be demolished. So there is no equality under the law. There is no equality in reality either. Now, the way they get around the vote is the Palestinian vote counts for about 10% of the members of the Israeli House of Representatives, the Knesset, about 12, 13 out of 120. They do not count on those votes for any important decision. These members of Knesset, even though today it's the third largest bloc within the Knesset, do not participate in any of the major committees, do not participate in any of the major decisions, and no Israeli government, no coalition will ever rely on them to pass a law. So those 13, today there's 12 of them, one within that block is Jewish. Out of those 12, everybody knows their vote is completely irrelevant. Completely irrelevant. And because the entire country is one voting district, there's no way for them to execute anything that will help their constituents anyway. So this is how Israel gets around creating the impression, the false impression, that somehow it is a democracy while excluding the Palestinians from the very democracy they claim to be. It is true it is a democracy for Jews. It is a Jewish democracy. For me, as an Israeli Jew, it is a democracy. For a Palestinian, for Dr. Karmi, if she chooses to go back and live there, who used to come from Jerusalem, that is not a democracy. And I'll say one more thing about Jerusalem, because you mentioned that, and I think it's crucially important. The western part of the city of Jerusalem, there's Rabbi Beck. Thank you for coming, Rabbi Beck. Please join us. You can come across the front if you like.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. According to international law, the city of Jerusalem should be a sovereign entity. The consulate generals, the consulate offices in Jerusalem do not report to the embassies, which are all in Tel Aviv, by the way, because the entire world has not recognized Jerusalem as the capital city of Israel. All the embassies, most of the embassies are still in Tel Aviv, and hopefully they'll remain there. And the consulates that do exist in Jerusalem predate the state of Israel and report directly to their capitals, not to their embassies, as consulates usually do, because they're separate political entities. Now, in 1948, the western part of Jerusalem was subjected to a 100% campaign of ethnic cleansing. Not a single Palestinian family was allowed to remain. Not one. The entire Palestinian neighborhoods were completely cleansed. Completely. The homes remained, because there's some very beautiful neighborhoods, some very beautiful homes. My mother, as a young woman in 1920, she was 22 in 1948, she was offered one of these beautiful homes. Thankfully, she had the political and the spiritual wherewithal to refuse and to say, I cannot move into the house of another family who now lives as a refugee. But those homes, the vast majority of these homes, the vast majority of these communities, of these neighborhoods have been inhabited by Israeli Jews and now live there very comfortably, as the owners of these homes live in refugee camps or elsewhere in other countries. So the western part of the city was subjected to an ethnic cleansing that was 100% complete. Not a single Palestinian was allowed to remain. In '67, Israel completed its conquest of the land of Israel, or historic Palestine, and then began a campaign of ethnic cleansing in East Jerusalem. Now, to say that there is any sense of coexistence in Jerusalem, which is one of the most racist cities in the world. I grew up in Jerusalem. I went to school in Jerusalem. We never saw a Palestinian. We never met a Palestinian. We were raised to hate two, and this is what defines you as a good Israeli Zionist. You are raised to hate two populations that live in that city and predate Zionism, by the way. The ultra-Orthodox community, because they rejected Zionism and warned the world of the dangers of Zionism, and the Arabs. That is what defines us as Israeli Zionists. Hating the ultra-Orthodox and hating and looking down at the Arabs.
Okay.
Hold on, just one more sentence. So to claim that there's any kind of coexistence within the city of Jerusalem is either complete blindness or complete false.
Yeah, let me respond.
So, Miko Peled made a comment about how Israeli citizens who live across the Green Line can vote in Israeli elections, and Palestinians who the Palestinian Authority control can't, and that proves that it's apartheid. He's missing a major point here. I mean, let's be serious. This is a man who is meant to know his stuff. Palestinians vote in Palestinian Authority elections. Israelis who live across the Green Line can't vote in Palestinian Authority elections. The fact that Mahmoud Abbas Abu Mazen is 15 years into a 4-year term after being elected 15 years ago, that's not an issue to do with Israel. The Palestinian Authority could have elections tomorrow, and every single Palestinian who lives across the Green Line could have a vote. They don't need to vote within Israel, they can vote within Palestine and the Palestinian Authority. Hamas had the elections. There were elections in Gaza after 2006, 2007, where it brutally deposed Fatah and kicked them out. Again, they can have elections there. There could be a joint election between the Palestinian Authority and Hamas tomorrow, and all those Palestinians, 4.2 million of them, could vote for their own leadership and their own government. The fact that those two can't get together to do it is not a reason to tar Israel with the apartheid brush. And I'll go even further than that. Go to Akko. Go to the city of Akko in the north of Israel. I've been there. Western Galilee College. 50% Muslim Israeli, 50% Muslim, 50% Jews. That's not apartheid. Jews and Muslims, Jews and Arabs studying together in university. Go to the Safat medical faculty, Israel's 5th medical school in Safat. Okay? Israeli Arab, and I will call them Israeli Arab lecturers, Israeli Arab students. That is not apartheid. Bibi Netanyahu's government is investing between 2015 and 2020, and you can Google this, $2.5 billion into the sector of the Arab-Israeli economy. That's not a country that engages in apartheid. These are all facts. You can go and look for them. I've been there, I've seen them. You can Google these facts. It's just not true. And Miko Peled talks about land laws. Give me a quote about the land law. Give me one particular quote. Don't just say it. Give me one quote. Tell me the exact law, because I've got a dossier in my bag of laws that are claimed to be apartheid, and the gentleman who wrote that dossier is sitting right in front of me, and I'm sure we can have an interesting conversation. If you're going to make those allegations, let's hear them. Specify them. Otherwise, you're just spouting and you're not proving anything. And I would go back to the last thing I'd say is that if you say Israel is an apartheid state, and you hate Israel so much, and you say it shouldn't exist, why on earth have you not given up your Israeli citizenship?
Are you going to ask more questions?
No, go ahead. Respond to that. You want to respond to that?
No, go ahead.
Right, okay.
Oh!
Next question. Okay, so no need for. So, what do you make of Raphi, the nation-state law, which was passed recently, which has been heavily accused of being racist and accused of being towards a trait of Jewish supremacy, really. You obviously know about that in case everyone doesn't. It declares that the nation-state of Israel is a Jewish state only, and that Hebrew is the sole official language, and demoted Arabic or downgraded to just a special status language. What do you make of that?
So the nation-state law is actually just reaffirms everything that was in the Declaration of Independence mostly. But if we take some of the points that you've raised, I mean, it talks about self-determination as one of its basic principles, and everybody seems to think that this is making Israel this racist apartheid state. But let's look at some examples around the world, just to prove what I'm saying, because I'm going to say things that I'm going to prove. The Slovak constitution opens with the words, "We the Slovak nation," and lays claim to the natural right of nations to self-determination. The Latvian constitution opens by invoking the unwavering will of the Latvian nation to have a state. Okay? Latvia's population is 25% Russian. Nobody's calling Latvia a racist state. And I think it's important because these allegations are hurled at Israel without any fact. Language. Hebrew is the language of the state of Israel. For example, did you know that Spain's constitution makes Castilian Spanish the official mother tongue of the country, even if their mother tongue is Basque Spanish or Catalan Spanish? Nobody's saying that Spain is a racist country. Okay? Welsh is the de jure official language of Wales, even if English is the de facto language and used more. Who here says that Wales is a racist country? No one. So you're looking at this. Religion is it's important to note that you're talking about Arabic within the nation-state law. Nothing in that law does anything to downgrade Arabic in actual fact. And in fact, there's even a clause in the law that says this clause does not harm the status given to the Arabic language before this law came into effect. The nation-state law doesn't do anything that makes Israel a racist state. It is a democracy. It's the only democracy in the Middle East. And it's important to note that. Israel, by the way, doesn't have official religions. Nothing in the basic law changes that. Israel is more liberal than 7 European countries that have constitutionally enshrined state religions, including this country.
Yeah, one thing we do agree, the nation-state law does not do anything that has not already existed. The only difference is the nation-state law has taken all the racist laws that Israel did pass, and I'm happy to discuss some of them, although it will take too much time. We don't have all that kind of time. The nation-state law has taken all the racist laws that Israel has already passed over the 70 years of its existence and codified it and constitutionalized it. So, from time to time, Palestinians do try to take their case to the Israeli courts. 98% they lose, but they do try to take them because some of these laws are racist laws and inherently racist laws. Now that these laws have become constitutionalized as part of Israel's basic laws, they cannot be challenged in court. So, for example, within this law, there's a clause that talks about the government encouraging Jewish-only settlements. In other words, encouraging Jewish-only settlements. Most settlements, whether they're in Tel Aviv, in Haifa, and Yafa, most Jewish settlements, colonies around the country, are segregated, are for Jews only. When you drive along the Highway 6, which is the main highway that goes north-south in the country, you will see new colonies being built within 1948 on lands that were taken from Palestinian towns that predate the state of Israel. We're not talking about what used to be the West Bank. I'm talking about within what they call proper Israel. I don't know what's proper about it. So within there, you see no attempt whatsoever to create any kind of living together conditions or spreading the wealth. The Israeli colonies that are being built have beautiful roads, constant water supply across the street, and we're talking about citizens of the state of Israel, even Palestinian citizens of the state of Israel. Their road structure is completely different. There is no infrastructure at all. There is no building permit. There are no building permits given at all. The water supply is limited to certain hours of the day, whereas across the street in the Jewish colonies, within the Israeli colonies, the water supply, and when you drive across, you're going to see on the Palestinian towns, you're going to see these big black water tanks on the roof. You don't see them across the street in the Jewish colonies. And I'm talking again within 1948, so within what people refer to as Israel proper, not really the West Bank. So I think it's important to realize that that is the reality. Now, some of these things are in the law, some of them are not. Palestinians, who make up, by the way, the majority, like I said, of the population between the river and the sea in historic Palestine, are allocated 3% of the water supply. And you can check that in as many sources as you want. 3% of the water supply. So you have a Palestinian town, a Palestinian village that gets 12 hours of water per week, and across the street you have a Jewish colony that gets all the water they possibly want. You know, and then we talk about this nation-state law has taken the ability of Palestinians to go to court and challenge any of these. Now, the very creation, the very existence of a so-called Jewish state, and I think Rabbi Beck will agree with me that there's nothing Jewish about the state of Israel, but a so-called Jewish state, or a state that offers exclusive rights to Jewish people within Palestine, and then defining it as a Jewish state for the Jews, and then passing a law that says only Jews have the right to self-determination within that land, within that country, and by the way, the language of the indigenous people who are not Jews, the vast majority of Israelis were not there before the state of Israel was established. Most of us are either descendants, are either immigrants and colonizers, or the descendants of immigrants and colonizers. The very language of the native population has been demoted. Not that it needs a formal demotion, because you barely see things in Arabic anyway. Israelis don't study Arabic in school, for example. You look at the schools, they're completely segregated and separated. They cannot teach the Palestinian Nakba in Israeli schools. That is a law. You cannot teach the Palestinian Nakba, the catastrophe that has befallen Palestinians when the state of Israel was established. You cannot teach that in Palestinian schools, and when a Palestinian teacher does try to bring it up, they get severely punished by a unit, an office within the Israeli education ministry, which is called the Security Office.
Never been enforced.
Okay, so these are all things. These are all things that I think are important to take into consideration, and of course, the very definition that says that 97% of the land can only be leased or sold to Jews. This is Arab land. This is Palestine. The fact that settlers and colonizers came and took it, changed the name, destroyed and continue to destroy on a regular basis towns and villages, bomb regularly, and I've not heard a single word of criticism about the shooting and targeting by snipers of innocent people in Gaza, the dropping of millions of tons of bombs on innocent civilians in Gaza over years. Israeli attacks in Gaza began in the early 1950s when Israel created the Gaza Strip as a home for refugees. For years. Zionists hailed this as some kind of great achievement, that in the first 5 minutes of the attack in 2008, at the end of 2008, they were able to kill 500 people. By the end of that 21-day attack, they killed over 1,000, and who knows how many tens of thousands injured. And never mind the fact that a child in the Gaza Strip, which Israel controls, 100% controls, and I don't know what Hamas is, but Hamas, which is a legitimate Palestinian resistance organization that had been elected by the Palestinians. I'm not going to get into that story with you right now. Harakat al-Muqawama al-Palestiniya have been engaged and have been willing and have been committed to agree to an agreement, which Israel refused to agree to, by the way, to stop targeting civilians. And Israel did not agree to this. Several Hamas leaders have already said that they would agree to an agreement with Israel that would keep both sides from targeting civilians. Israel is not interested because they know Palestinians are all civilians. Palestinians have never had an army or a military force.
Right. Okay. And there was a lot in there, but
I'll try and come back briefly. So just let's address the water issue, because that's quite an emotive allegation and lie, really. In 2017, Israel and the Palestinians...
Come with me to Palestine, show me how it's a lie. Come with me to Palestine, see the homes without water supply, and tell me that's a lie. Shut up! You're not invited here. Be quiet. There's one moderator. It's not your job to tell them to communicate.
Okay, all right. Let me answer. So as it happens, I was in the West Bank.
Yes, I'm sure you were welcomed with open arms. Go ahead.
Okay.
Yes.
Have you been to Rawabi?
Yes, I have.
Okay, phenomenal city. Phenomenal city. Luxury. This is not the West Bank that Miko Peled is telling you about. Ramallah can be like it looks like any Israeli city. It's modern buildings, cars, shops, restaurants, okay? Let's just go back to the water issue, I think, because that's quite an emotive issue and it's actually baseless. And Al Jazeera, I just Googled it, you can Google it yourself. Al Jazeera report in 2017, the Israeli government, the Palestinian Authority, signed a deal to supply 32.9 billion cubic of water to Gaza and the West Bank from 2017. The fact is that the Palestinians now have a modern water supply in the West Bank that the Israelis have built. And if there are shortages of water, a lot of it comes from the fact that within the Palestinian towns, the pipework is antiquated and there's about a 33% leakage rate. Okay, anybody who lives in London knows what Thames Water's like. It was similar up until a few years ago. Okay, so Israel does not, now I'm not talking about a ship actually, Israel actually does not deprive the Palestinians of water. There were lots of allegations about this and it was proved to be completely false. And you talk about this Nakba law, about not being able to teach the Nakba in Israeli schools. And yes, it is true there is a law that says that. However, it has never been enforced in one case. Ever has it ever been enforced, or any school been fined because of it?
And you would know.
Yes.
You would know.
Yes.
Oh, of course.
Well,
because people
check it
confide
up.
in you.
Check it up.
I check it up. I
Check
talk
it
to
up.
Palestinian teachers all the time.
So when was the last time it was enforced? Can you tell me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, tell me then.
Why was it even made?
The question is truly why was it?
Okay.
That's another issue.
Right, let me just finish, yeah. And it's interesting actually, because what you hear, the constant theme, and we've been here for about an hour now, the constant theme is this, is that I've said from the start, I believe in two states living side by side in peace and security. Okay? Peace, security, two nations having self-determination and can live in peace and security. All Miko Peled wants to do is destroy Israel. Okay? And that's come through loud and clear. I think everybody here can hear that. He's getting more and more irate as we go on. Who wants to have two peoples living side by side in peace? So our children, my cousin, my mother, my cousin's children can live there in peace. Or who wants to destroy Israel? I know what side I'm on, and I know what side Miko Peled's on. And he still hasn't answered the question, and maybe he will now. Why haven't you given up your Israeli citizenship?
All right, can I?
Danny,
All right, let's talk about the two-state solution for a minute, okay?
This is about a topic. It's not about two personalities just clashing.
I'm answering the
It's
question.
good.
on the
It's
top.
all
That's not the brief of the event. Okay?
Okay,
You need
okay.
to take this back to the brief of the event.
We are.
Please.
We are. Go ahead.
Thank you. Let's talk about the two-state solution. My father was one of the people who invented the two-state solution. While still in uniform in 1967, as soon as the 67 war ended, in the very, very first, and I talk about this in the book, in the very first meeting of the Israeli General Command, High Command, he stood up and he said, we now have an opportunity to make peace with the Palestinians. This is our land, which he believed thoroughly. He was a Zionist through and through. And he said, however, there is another nation that lives here. In 1947, the United Nations passed a partition law which supposedly was supposed to create two states. Israel ignored it completely and went on a rampage and conquered 80%, took 80% in violation of international law. However, in 1967, he said, we now have the possibility to create the two-state, but under conditions that are favorable, far more favorable to us, because now we have almost 80% of the land. We're a strong country. We have a Jewish majority. So we need to present this to the Palestinians. Now, as he was saying these very words, this is immediately, days after the war, Israeli bulldozers were already destroying entire neighborhoods in East Jerusalem and entire villages and towns and cities in the West Bank, kicking out hundreds of thousands of Palestinians from the West Bank and building again, continuing to build, as they did in other parts of Palestine after 1948, for Jews only, on Palestinian land. One of the first commands, by the way, given by the military after the 67 war, was that the water in the West Bank, the Mount Aquifer is a very important source of water for the country, belongs to Israel. So Palestinians have to buy their water from the Israeli authorities. Now, my father retired about a year later, and he continued for the rest of his life. He died in 1995. He continued for the rest of his life to push for this idea of a two-state solution. Israel, consecutive Israeli governments, did absolutely everything they could to make sure that that was not going to be possible. They built massive colonies, cities, entire cities. And they said, well, maybe we could have a two-state solution. However, the major colonies, the major cities that we build are not going to be included in the Palestinian state. The expanded boundaries of Jerusalem, which basically slice the West Bank in half, are not going to be included, and the entire Jordan River Valley are not going to be included in this two-state solution. So in other words, 2/3 of the West Bank, which again is only about 22% of Palestine, is not going to be included in any of this. The creation of a single state over all of Palestine was a Zionist creation. I didn't do it. The Palestinians didn't do it. When my father was in uniform, and he was criticized by members of the High Command, saying Palestinians will never agree to this. The Palestinians are going to want what they were promised by the United Nations, an entire Palestinian state, a larger portion of Palestine, And he brought reports, intelligence reports, that showed the Palestinian leadership, the local Palestinians were perfectly willing and ready to create that particular two-state solution as it was established from that point on. It was Israel who built settlements. It was Israel who destroyed the infrastructure of the Palestinians. It was Israel who continued to pass laws that made it impossible for Palestinians to live. It's Israel that divided Palestinians within the West Bank into all kinds of different areas and categories with different laws that pertain to their lives. It was Israel that established a reality where today all of Palestine, or like I said, as some may call it, Israel, from the river to the sea, is one state. True, there is this little thing called the Palestinian Authority, kind of a puppet government that Israel created, which has no authority. The Palestinian president needs a pass to go through a checkpoint, and any junior officer can stop him along the way if he chooses to when he travels between Palestinian cities. So Israel created this reality of a single state, which is a racist state, an apartheid state, a state that holds thousands of political prisoners, thousands and thousands of political prisoners, including children, in its prisons, without due process, using military law, using torture chambers against children as well, and presenting itself as though we're a democracy, we didn't mean for all this to happen, we don't have a partner. Israel doesn't have a partner because Israel doesn't want a partner.
Okay.
Israel assassinated, let me just finish this, okay? He's been talking for hours.
One more point.
Israel has assassinated so many Palestinian, the most moderate Palestinian leaders were assassinated by Israel and Israeli cronies because they were willing to talk peace, because they were interested in the two-state solution. So the choice today that we have, and it's very easy to throw this notion of destroying Israel. What does that mean? It means destroying the privilege. Destroying the privilege that I have as an Israeli citizen with my Israeli ID, and unfortunately Israel is still the governing body, so they give the ID and they give the passports. When Palestine is free and there's a proper Palestinian government in place, I'd be quite happy.
You can renounce it.
I'd be quite happy
You can
to.
renounce it.
I'd be quite happy to. That is the citizenship that they provide.
You can
So
renounce
that is the reality today. But the privilege is what needs to be destroyed. The vision is not a vision of violence, which is what you present. The vision is a vision of two people living together in a single democratic state, as opposed to two people living together, not together, segregated under a vicious, violent regime which bombs innocent civilians and denies them water. And all the stuff you talked about the water now is complete fabrication. Gaza, with 2 million people, 98% of the water is unfit for human consumption. 2 million people, half of them are children. Never mind, they're constantly being bombed, constantly under attack by Israel. I didn't hear one word of criticism from the entire Zionist band here for the fact that Israeli forces were just caught by the Palestinian authorities in Gaza, pretending to be a relief unit, which is another violation of international law, pretending to be an international relief unit. And they were caught, and they were eventually, a couple were killed as well. Nothing is being said about that. To pretend to be a relief unit in Gaza, which is desperate for relief, and life for Gazans is incredibly difficult, and Israel makes it incredibly difficult for relief workers to go into Gaza, as it is now. Now it's making every relief worker within the Gaza Strip a suspect of collaborating with Israel or being an Israeli secret, some kind of a secret operative. Okay. This is the state of Israel, and this is what needs to be taken away, and this is what needs to be changed from a racist, violent state into a democracy with equal rights, where Israelis and Palestinians do live together, not under supremacist laws like they do now.
Okay, right. I just want to come back, I think, just a few minutes. There's a lot of dimensions like that. Do you think, just quickly, do you think it's a fair battle, anyway, when there is an uptick in violence, when what Miko's saying is that perhaps the water quality and they have, a few puny rockets and rocks and stones went against the most advanced military, one of the most advanced military machines in the world. Is it a fair fight?
So actually, I'm glad you asked me that, because I was just going to focus on Gaza. Let's look at Hamas for 1 second in Gaza. So in 2005, when Israel withdrew from Gaza, if you've ever been, and I don't know, Miko, have you been to the Erez border crossing? It's built like Ben Gurion Airport. It was built to handle 60,000 Palestinians every day coming into Israel to work. I was there again 8 months ago. Let's remember what happened in Gaza. Hamas brutally staged a coup against Fatah. They threw Fatah members off the roofs of buildings. Hamas is a prescribed terrorist organisation. This is the organisation that runs Gaza. The UK prescribe it, the EU prescribe it, the US prescribe it. It is a terrorist.
You took it off the terrorist list.
No, it didn't.
Yes, they did.
No, it didn't. It was going to, and it didn't. And you can Google that as well. There's no facts coming from the other side. It's a prescribed terrorist organisation whose charter calls very specifically, and you can go and Google it, to hunt Jews anywhere in the world and kill them. The Jew will be hiding behind the rock, and the rock will tell me, there's a Jew hiding behind me, come and kill it. That's in their charter, that's word for word. So you are dealing with an organisation that steals aid, that builds terror tunnels. And I'm not talking about tunnels into Raphi because Egypt as well has a closer on it. It builds tunnels into the neighbouring villages and kibbutzim around the border for the use of terror attacks, and it did that in 2014. $3 million every tunnel costs. That is aid that could go to ordinary Palestinians in Gaza. It builds rockets. These aren't puny rockets, by the way. The fact that Israel has an Iron Dome to protect its civilians is not something that should be used as a stick to beat Israel with. It's a country that's protecting its civilians. Those rockets, you have 15 seconds if those rockets come to get to a bomb shelter. So it's not this. Hamas is a terrorist organisation. It seeks to destroy Israel. Yes, there have been attempts to have a hudna, to have a truce between Israel and Hamas. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But let's look at the Palestinian Authority's role in all this as well. Mahmoud Abbas has cut the salaries of thousands, tens of thousands of Fatah employees in Gaza. He's forced early retirement or more. And again, I'm not just saying this, I'm dealing with facts here. Okay, he's done this as a way to exacerbate the problems in the Gaza Strip and put pressure on Hamas because he doesn't like Hamas. Israel just agreed recently to allow the Qatari government to ship $15 million in cash in suitcases through the Erez and Kerem Shalom border crossings every month to pay salaries. Mahmoud Abbas went to the Israeli government and complained about it. He stopped paying for electricity in Gaza. The Palestinians are at war with each other. And if you look at, follow Kogat on Twitter, there are dozens and dozens and hundreds of trucks every week that go into Gaza with aid and with food and with supplies. There could be peace. Gaza could be the Singapore of the Middle East, but it is run by a genocidal terrorist organisation. And if Miko Peled wants to sit here and defend Hamas, I'd like to hear him do that, because at the end of the day, suicide bombers on the streets of Jerusalem, people shooting pregnant women in the stomach, this is Hamas. This is a terrorist organisation that everybody in the Western world calls a terrorist organisation, and they are running Gaza.
Just quickly, in August, the US State Department cut aid. You mentioned aid going to the Gaza Strip. And this is aid that's cutting over $200 million in aid, which apparently will affect thousands and thousands, even children in Palestine. So when aid's being cut and there's been hostile actions from the international community, arguably from the Trump administration, how do you square that?
Are you referring to the cutting aid to UNRWA?
To USA.
So, President Trump cut aid. I know he's withdrawing US aid from the territories, and this actually goes back to the pay-to-slay law that the Palestinian Authority has. And again, this is very interesting, and this is fact, and I'd be interested to see if Miko Peled actually defends this as well. So the Palestinian Authority has a rule, as a law, that if you're a terrorist, so if you're a Palestinian and you steal an Israeli car and you go to an Israeli jail, you get nothing. If you're a Palestinian and you break into somebody's house and you go to jail, you get nothing. If you're a Palestinian and you either murder or wound an Israeli in a terrorist attack, you get a salary for life that is roughly 7 to 10 times the amount that an average Palestinian earns. And if you don't believe me, I can show you somewhere the pay-to-slay tables. Here we go. Palestinian authorities. If you're a martyr, what they call a martyr, if you have been killed committing a terrorist attack, you get a payment of 6,000 shekels immediately, and then you get a monthly base payment your survivors do for life of 1,400 shekels a month. This is pay-to-slay. This is $320 million a year of aid that the Palestinian Authority gets that they use to reward terrorist murderers. So when President Trump decided to cut aid, the Taylor Force Act came into effect. Taylor Force was an ex-US Marine who was murdered in Jaffa, was stabbed to death, and the US Congress actually said, you know, it wasn't President Trump, it was the US Congress. He said, look, we're not going to give aid if it's going to pay terrorists who are in jail for committing murders or injuring Israeli civilians. So that is why aid is cut. It's cut because it's being used to pay terrorists. It's simple as that, and that's a fact.
Just quickly, Miko, just to add to that as well, I mean, the IDF said in July 14th alone, this year actually, Hamas fired 200 rockets and mortars in just one day. And as Raphi rightly added, you have very little time to get to a bomb shelter. It's a difficult situation. When you have Hamas saying, for example, here, telling civilians to ignore calls by the IDF, to ignore leaflets to leave their homes, there's accusations of them using, human shields for people to try and pull on the heartstrings of the international community. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, the human shields story is another lie, but never mind that. The important thing to underline, the point to underline is this. There is a regime, there's such a colonial regime that has been destroying Palestine for 7 decades. They've created a massive humanitarian catastrophe, not only in the Gaza Strip, but in refugee camps, Palestinian refugee camps around the entire Middle East. These refugees are not allowed to return to their home, by the way, we talk about racist laws, because the Israeli law of return allows Jews, any Jew in this room that has never been to that country is allowed to go. Palestinian, the Karbi, for example, with roots in Palestine, cannot return. So there's the existence of this humanitarian catastrophe. Now, Palestinians have been engaged in resistance to occupation, to settler colonialism, to oppression, is sanctified by international law, even with the use of arms.
Against civilians?
Even with the use of arms.
Against civilians?
Now, like I said before, Hamas, the leaders of Hamas, including Sheikh Ahmed Yassin, who was brutally murdered by Israel in his wheelchair, even he said, when he was approached by the Israelis while he was in jail, the Israelis approached him and asked him to stop targeting civilians. He said, I will sign an agreement with Israel today to stop targeting civilians on both sides. Israel was not interested, because Israel knows Palestinians are all civilians. And if Israel cannot target civilians, they will be able to kill no one. That is the underlying issue here. Resistance, whether we like it or not, whether it's appealing to us or not, is legitimate. Resistance of an oppressed people. Resistance of an oppressed people. Don't talk to me about civilians, because I saw what it's like to lose a 13-year-old girl, okay? But you cannot take it out of context. You cannot live the life of a privileged white person, settler colonizer, in a country, take away their rights, deny them their water, their land, and their freedom, and their life, and expect to sit around with no consequences. So is it nice when there's suicide bombers? Of course not. Is it nice when the civilians are being killed? Of course not. But the vast majority of the killing of civilians, the vast majority of targeting civilians, the vast majority of the deportation of civilians is by Israel of the Palestinians. Where's your criticism of that? Where's your criticism when Palestinian women have to give birth at a checkpoint? Where's your criticism when thousands of Palestinian children are massacred? When Israel drops tons and tons of bombs on civilians, tons of bombs, and look at your facts, you'll find exactly what happens when a 1-ton bomb is dropped. An entire city block is destroyed with everybody in it. Now imagine days and days and days of carpet bombing, millions of tons of bombs. You talk about 15 seconds to run to a shelter. There are no shelters. Why are there tunnels in Gaza? Because there is no supply in Gaza. And why are the tunnels destroyed in Gaza? Because Israel wants to keep the people in Gaza starving and dying of thirst. And if there's one sure way to kill people other than to shoot them, is to deny them water. That's what they're doing in the Gaza Strip.
Are you seriously claiming that the tunnels that go to the neighbouring kibbutzim villages are so they can smuggle goods in? We're not talking about Raphi here, which I know you've experienced.
Hold on.
Are you saying that for supply of food and water?
I am saying that the Palestinian, I'm saying that the Palestinian resistance, be it BDS, be it the military resistance, be it the protest on the ground in countless towns and villages on a regular basis, is, according to international law, legitimate and sanctified. Because the right of oppressed people to resist is sanctified and legitimate. Nobody wants to see the civilians die, so Israel can stop bombing and murdering civilians. When the people of Gaza march, and have been marching for months now, they're not marching into an international border, which they would have you believe. They're marching against a prison wall, a prison fence. Their lands, their home, their rights are on the other side. And all these kibbutzim and all these colonies, Jewish Israeli colonies on the other side, live on their land, stole their water, raise their children, and expect to be not harmed. Expect to just go on with their life as though they did nothing wrong. There are no consequences for this. There are consequences for this. And if Israel doesn't like the tunnels, and if you don't like the Hamas, and if you don't like the rockets being flown out, open the gates, free Palestine, allow the refugees to return to their homes, and everybody can live together in peace. But you don't want that. You want a racist state, you want a big army, you want to walk around and say, I'm an Israeli and we can kill all of these Palestinians. That's what you want. Because Zionists are racist. And that is exactly what I said when we started here. There is no dialogue here. There is no bridge here. There's racism, violence, and there's the right of people to be free and fight for their freedom. That is what is at stake here. That is what this conversation is about.
Very brief.
I'm going to ignore most of what Miko said because a lot of it is just fanciful stuff, but I'll deal with the one-state solution one more time and I'll repeat what I said, because it's not just me saying this. Norman Finkelstein, one of the doyens, one of the leading voices of the pro-Palestinian movement, has said the idea of a one-state solution is ludicrous. Uri Avneri, I believe he was, as I said before, friendly with Miko's father, has said it's a stupid idea, it's a crazy idea, it's an idea without foundation. It's all very well for Miko Peled to sit here and say, yes, let the Palestinians return to what potentially was their home. First of all, let's just look at the refugee issue for a second. The Palestinians are the only people in the world where refugee status is handed down from generation to generation. Let's just look at it in the UK perspective. Somebody from Syria comes to this country and seeks asylum and is given asylum. Great, he's a British citizen. He's 18 years old. In 10 years' time, he has a child. That child is a British citizen. Okay? In 20 years' time, that child has a child. This Syrian refugee has a grandchild. He's a British citizen. Okay? Palestinians, there are only about 30 or 40,000 Palestinians who originally lived in what was British Mandate Palestine that are alive today. The other generations are not refugees. The fact that they were not absorbed into the countries of the Arab nations that took them in is nothing to do with Israel. They are not refugees. And I come back to the justice and peace argument again. Absorbing whatever they say it is, 5.5 million or 6 million Palestinians or Arabs who claim to be refugees into Israel, and making one state would, within one fell swoop, make the Jewish nation not the Jewish nation anymore. And we know what would happen. And we're not even talking about Hamas, who would want it to be a Muslim theocracy like it is in Gaza. Come on, guys, let's get real. It's all very well sitting here saying it's great, let's have one utopian democratic state. But are we all here? We're all intelligent people here. Are we really saying that's going to happen? Look what happens to other minorities around the Middle East. Okay? Israel is the nation state of the Jewish people. It's the only state in the world where Jews can have safety. Okay? Look what happened. Jews have been persecuted throughout their history. Okay? So all of a sudden, you have a state where there are, let's say, 12 or 14 million Muslim citizens, Arab citizens, and 7 million Jewish citizens. Are we all thinking really rationally that that is going to end well when you have Hamas? I'm not talking about the Palestinian Authority, I'm talking about Hamas, who are an Islamic genocidal group. Look what they did. They're an anti-Semitic group. Look what they did to Fatah, to their own Palestinian brothers in Gaza. And you think this is going to work? I mean, you know, it's all very well saying it. Unlike me, however, who wants to have two states living side by side in peace and security. That is a fact.
That is what I want. I want two people to live in peace. All Miko Peled is spouting on about is one state, which in reality, it's not me saying this, Uriah Neri, Norman Finkelstein, these are not people that sit on my side of the fence, have said is a crazy idea.
Okay,
so let's get real.
So, I mean, we could go on all night really with this. Very emotional on both sides, rightfully so. It's a critical issue. I'll tell you to a few questions. If anyone has them, just raise your hand. And, yeah.
Okay, so you talked very nobly about racism, Mr. Peled. I ask you most respectfully. Rabbi Beck over there is undeniably a Jew, as am I. We don't dress the same, but we're both of the same religion. Can you confirm at 10:55 p.m. on the 14th of September 2016, talk about racism, that Jews have a reputation for being sleazy thieves? Do you believe you said that? You said that, so is that what you believe?
Do you want me to talk about this again? I'll talk about this again if that's what you want. Of course, context is everything, right?
There's no context for that.
Do you want an answer, or do you want to give the answer yourself? Now, suddenly when you point out the racism, the big band here that fights anti-Semitism whenever you criticize Israel is blind to the racism. If you've read Shakespeare, if you've read Dickens, if you've read almost anything and seen so many of what Western culture is about, you know that there's anti-Semitism, and you know that Jews have a reputation that has to do with money. I don't think it's a secret, right? It's not a secret. I have friends who are my age who grew up in America who grew up with that image as kids in school. But Jews and money, there's this racist characterization of Jews and money. Is this new to you? No. You've heard about this, right?
You wrote it.
Yes. So, but you've heard that this exists. You've heard that this exists, right? Okay. Very well. The connection was this. The United States and the State of Israel had just signed an agreement where the United States commits to give Israel $38 billion over a 10-year period. $38 billion. Israel has a strong economy. Israel uses weapons to murder innocent civilians. Israel does not need or deserve this money. The only reason the United States continues to give Israel this amount of money every year is through backdoor, mafia-style, blackmailing, underhanded tactics. That's the only reason.
Thank you for that answer.
Now, the reason what I said was, Jews have this reputation. I mean, we know that racist characterization of Jews as being thieves and so forth exists. What I pointed out was that Zionists, their greed, their thievery, their underhanded techniques to get that money is the reason for that reputation.
Okay.
And there is no reason.
Excuse me. We'll come to one
Because
more.
the Zionists represent themselves as Jews.
Danny,
Yes.
Danny.
Just
Move it on. You've got 2 minutes left.
Let's move on. This is the last question.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, are these people making videos of everything they've said? Are they allowed to do that? Were they given permission?
Just ask a question which is relevant.
No, because I don't want to be videoed by these people.
I'm not.
They're not
Okay?
going to don't worry.
If you don't mind. Now, I just want to tell you very quickly.
She said stop videoing. Hello.
No, can he put it down?
Sorry,
Just film the answer, film the
I
answer.
only have one more question. Go ahead, ma'am. Go ahead.
Okay. Now, I'll tell you something. I'm a friend with Miko Peled. I admire him. I respect him. But with the best will in the world, I might not have come out on a very, very cold night like this to hear him alone. I really tell you, I came because I wondered whether the other side had any new arguments, any fresh things to say, which I would have learned from. What I discovered with the very greatest sense of impression is that the other side, this gentleman, has trotted out every single cliche or chestnut
Where's the
that
question?
the Zionists have in their bag, and it is very depressing, sir. to listen to this litany of stuff that you've spouted. Is that the best you can do to defend Israel?
That's a question.
Really? No, that's one question. But secondly, I just want to say, I am very dismayed by the smirking of particularly these people in the second row, the scoffing at a
It's a
person
statement.
like
It's a
me,
statement.
and no, I must finish this, and a person like Miko Peled, who has the courage to have gone against his upbringing, his indoctrination as a Zionist, and come out in the way that he has for truth and justice, unlike our friend here and the smirking group here. If you want to know about Israel, to everybody in this room, ask me. I'm Palestinian. I have direct experience of what Israel is, and it has nothing to do with this gentleman's birth
Okay, listen. Anyway.
whatsoever.
Okay, so if anyone wants to ask questions afterwards and the speakers are willing to do it, they can come up and say their piece and everything. But I just want to say thank you everybody for being here, and it's important that we have these discussions. So thank you very much. Thank you.
I'd like to say thank you very much for having me. We've come from Manchester, I appreciate it. And I'd just like to ask Miko one last question. Again, he's wearing a big BDS sign. Why does he use an iPhone? The second largest R&D centre is in Israel. Sounds a bit hypocritical to me.
No answer.
All right then.